Thank you. Good morning. All right, so header bidding, something that I think causes a lot of confusion. How many folks have questions about header bidding? Don't quite know what it is. Anybody want a little help refresher on this? How many people are actually doing header bidding? Anyone? Anyone? A few folks. Okay, great. That's great. Awesome. So let's talk about header bidding. One of the big questions that people ask is this just a hack? Like, is this something we really need to worry about, or is this just sort of something that's coming along? And we've seen a lot of press, actually, that have talked about how this is just a hack, and we see headlines that say, oh, header bidding, it's just a hack. What does a hack actually mean in this context? I mean, a hack in this context, they're saying, well, it's something that was done sort of quickly and roughly and kind of a toss-off. It's not really something that is elegant and clean and well-designed. And that may well be true, but as it turns out, sometimes hacks are the way that you get started with something, right? And sometimes that's the gateway to some much larger thing. And so this is the question, is this just a hack? Or is this something that's going to become a gateway to a much larger, much more important path to true yield management? And what's interesting is we're seeing also an equivalent number of sort of press releases that talk about, well, maybe it's not just a hack. Maybe it is actually the beginning of something really important. Maybe, as this bottom one says, it's a technique that's actually changing how publishers are selling ads. So which is it? Well, let's start by talking a little bit about how it actually works. It's relatively simple. You put a piece of code in the header of your HTML page, which means it gets executed right away. It calls out to a number of bidders, including AppNexus, and it says, hey, I have a bunch of ads here. Are you interested in bidding on them? And if so, what are you willing to bid? And those bids come back into the browser, and the browser formulates them, puts them into a call, and sends them into your ad server. So this is a way for the ad server to learn, are there other bids that might be valuable for this particular set of ads, right? Here's the interesting part. Most current ad servers today were built with a waterfall in mind. They were built with the idea that the top priority is going to be guaranteed ads, where we've guaranteed some number of impressions at a high priority. The next priority might be non-guaranteed, other deals that I've done. And then the last priority is going to be exchange, where I send everything that I didn't do guaranteed, non-guaranteed, I'll just send it off to the exchange and see what they can do. So the real issue here is I've got these bids coming in. They're coming in at the top of the waterfall. But how do I make sure that they're really competing with the guaranteed and not just kind of stuck at the bottom with the exchange along with everything else? So what's interesting here is when you think about where's the actual hack in header bidding, it's not where most people think. Most people think, oh, putting something in the header of the web page, that's kind of a hack. Actually, putting something in the header of a web page is a completely legitimate way to get data into your ad server. So there's a lot, and maybe you want to do it server to server, maybe you want to do it in the header, but there's no reason that doing it in the header is any more of a hack than any other way of collecting data and sending it into the ad server to actually get the appropriate ad setup. What is the hack is when you look at how your ad server is set up. And most ad servers today have been around for a long time, and they were set up when waterfalls were the way that you actually did your ad serving. So you have your guaranteed layer, you have your non-guaranteed layer, and you have your exchange layer, and they're in a strict priority. And the exchange layer does not compete with the guaranteed layer. So the hack is trying to make an ad server that was designed this way to actually behave as if the exchange bids are competing with the guaranteed at the same level of priority. The reason people have to do this with a header bidding mechanism right now is because the only way to even get the bids into an ad server like that is to get them in as key value pairs. And anyone who's actually done this implementation with an ad server like a DFP or, frankly, most of the other ones that are out there, has had to then set up all kinds of campaigns in their ad server at different levels of priority with different targeting to key value pairs to make sure that they're actually forcing that competition to happen at the top level of the ad server. That's where the hack is. hacking an ad server that was never designed to do true holistic yield management into doing that. Of course, our solution to this is, why don't we design an ad server that does this automatically, right? So if you want, you can actually buy an ad server that has this built in. We don't care if the bids come in through the header. We don't care if they come in server to server. The fact is, we treat all of them equally, and we have them all compete with guaranteed on an equal level. So we're not preferentially treating one source of demand like ad X. We're not preferentially treating whether it comes in through server to server or through pre-bid. However it comes in, we treat it the same. And whether it's guaranteed or non-guaranteed or exchange, we have them all compete. One of the reasons that we're so successful at that is because we have super accurate forecasting. So interestingly, it's very hard to make guaranteed compete with non-guaranteed if you don't know how many you have to deliver. So if you're not really sure if your guaranteed is going to deliver, then you have to be super conservative about how you do this competition. But if you have super accurate forecasting, then you can actually do a much better job of ensuring that you're capturing full value out of this. And if you layer on even more things like, let's talk about viewable guarantees, for example, then it starts getting even more complicated. And again, you need a system that's purpose-built to do this. So you can hack an ad server to do this, and you can get a lot of value out of it. But the real answer for solving the hack is to have a solution that treats all of your sources of demand equally. Why is this actually generating real revenue for people? Let's take a look at a hypothetical example and get a sense of where the money's actually coming from, because sometimes this is confusing. Let's imagine that we have a guaranteed campaign that needs 5,000 impressions, and then we're going to send the rest of the impressions off to the exchange for monetization. A typical waterfall method would effectively serve the first 5,000 impressions to the guaranteed campaign, collect that $5 for each 1,000, so 25 bucks, and then send the remaining 3,000 impressions off to the exchange and get whatever they get. And in this case, we get another $5 from the exchange for those 3,000 impressions, and our total monetization is $30. But it's easy to see how this could be a lot more efficient if you understood where the bids were coming from as you were delivering this guaranteed, and if you had the forecasting to be able to do this efficiently, right? So clearly, if you're doing something with header bidding integration or with an ad server that actually understands how to do this efficiently, then you would distribute it a lot more effectively, right? You would collect that $7 and that $6 bid that happened even early in the campaign. You would still deliver on your guaranteed. So your guaranteed is still getting the 5,000 impressions they need. You're still getting that $25. But now the exchange is giving you much higher value. And instead of $30 total, you're getting $44 total. This is where the money's coming from, right? This is how it actually generates revenue for you. And don't take my word for it, right? This happens in the real world. You heard some of the numbers from Brian this morning. I had a publisher who's actually in this room tell me they saw a 40% increase in revenue from header bidding just in the last couple of months. Digiday has some reporting about 40–50% increases in header bidding. Livingly, which is a case study that we did, originally before we started working with them, 90% of their revenue was coming from AdX. They put in header bidding. Now only 40% of their revenue is coming from AdX. 50% of their revenue is now coming from header bids that are beating AdX, higher value. And the end result there is a 2x increase in CPMs. And this is a huge, huge value for a small publisher, or for any publisher for that matter, right? So the fact is, in the real world, lots and lots of people are doing this. In the US, we've seen numbers as high as 70% penetration. In the EU, I know it's a lot lower right now, but it's rapidly, rapidly becoming adopted. It's generating real revenue. One interesting thing that people often, the very first question people always ask us, what about latency? What about the user experience? Isn't this going to cause all kinds of latency and we're going to see more bounce rates and all those kinds of things? Livingly, in there, you can see at the bottom of the slide, no material change in user experience. They tested it upside down, and they found out there was no increase in latency, right? We've actually done a widespread data collection with HeaderBid Expert. Brian talked a little bit about HeaderBid Expert, which shows you what the latency is from all the different header bidders, not just AppNexus, but all the different bidders that are happening. If you have a properly implemented wrapper that's doing asynchronous calls and proper timeouts, there's basically no impact on latency. In fact, we've seen a number of instances where the latency is actually improved because the waterfall that we replaced was taking a long time. If you think about the passbacks and the things that have to happen in a waterfall, often the delivery of the ad in a waterfall is much slower than the delivery of an ad in a header bidding scenario. So let's talk a little bit about what you want to look for in a solution here. There's a number of things you want to make sure you have. You want to have a wrapper. You want to have the bidders lined up. You want to make sure that you're doing some analytics so you understand what's going on. And then you want to have services to help you implement this and optimize it, right? Now, why do you want a wrapper? Well, it turns out that having more than one header bidder actually generates more revenue for you. And so while I would love to say, hey, just hook up AppNexus and you're all set, the fact is you're probably going to hook up more header bidders besides AppNexus, and you're going to want a wrapper. And so, you know, what we'll have for a wrapper, what we recommend for a wrapper is prebid.js. It's open source. We've contributed a lot of the source code, but so have a number of other vendors and a number of publishers. More importantly, because it's open source, you can actually inspect it and see it is not treating any source of demand any differently from any other source of demand. It is completely unbiased with respect to the way that it brings in the bids and the way that it allocates them for you. It also does a couple of other very important things. Like I said, if you want to minimize latency, make sure that the calls are asynchronous and make sure that they have good timeouts set. Prebid.js makes these kinds of things very easy. Once again, don't take my word for it. We have over 9,000 websites that are using prebid.js right now, including 1,000 in EMEA. So this is probably the most used header bidder wrapper out there. And just because it's open source doesn't mean it doesn't have support. We at AppNexus will support the entire wrapper in addition to our bidder. So that's a very important consideration. Next thing, of course, you want to sign up bidders, including AppNexus, to make sure you're getting the demand. You want to make sure that you have some analytics put on top of this so that you're paying attention to what's actually going on here. We have one of the most powerful analytics platforms around with YieldX. We're building in pre-bid analytics on top of that so we can give you very good insight. Header Bid Expert is another example of analytics that you want to do. When you implement this, you want to make sure that you're testing, that you're not increasing your latency. You can use tools like Header Bid Expert to ensure that that's the case. And then finally, services on top. We do provide services to help out with this. This stuff can be complicated. We have a lot of in-house knowledge and best practices that we can help bring to the table. So I talked a little bit about how, is this a hack or is this the gateway to true yield management? We think that header bidding is a gateway to actually getting access to all of the sources of demand in an equal and unbiased way, not treating any one separately from any other one or having additional taxes on some and not others. This is treating them all the same. So the hack is not where you think. It's not just the fact that something's in the header. The hack is because the ad server that most people are using is not capable of doing this kind of holistic yield management. And despite, sort of tack on things that have been thrown in like EBDA, the fundamental architecture of the ad server wasn't built for this. So the key thing, if you don't want to have the hack, think about upgrading your ad server. If that's not an option, which I realize it's not an option for everybody right away, then get started with header bidding. It's actually relatively easy to get started. Come talk to us. It's generating lots of revenue for lots of people out there. And the longer you wait to get started, the more revenue you're leaving on the table. Thank you.